Hello, welcome back to Planet 40k. We got another video for you today, and we're going to be doing the Canoptek Reanimator. So we're going to be doing the advanced tactics as well as the review and giving it a stamp of approval at the end of the video. Just a quick shout out before we begin to Zacharias Wade for joining the elite members area down below. So if you haven't already checked that one out, click the join button for more information. Also check out the Discord if you haven't already. Link will also be down below. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the Canoptek Reanimator. Now if you've been watching the channel for a while now, you'd know that this is not one of my favoured units within the Necron Codex. But we're going to go through it today and we're going to see if it has a little bit of an improvement, especially since the balance update that's came out quite recently. So let's start with the datasheet. So the Canoptek Reanimator is an elite choice within the Codex. It comes in at 4 power level or 80 points. So stat wise, it's got an 8-inch movement. Ballistic skill and weapon skill is 4+, strength and toughness is 5, wounds 6, attacks 4, leadership 10 and a 3+ armor save. So a lot of people forget that this actually does move quite quick at 8 inches, but all the other stats are pretty mediocre for a monster model, especially that toughness only being 5. So let's move on to the rest of the datasheet with the keywords. So it's got the Canoptek keyword, so that's going to relate to some of the stratagems, maybe some interactions with characters, and there's a few other bits and bobs within the codex which we'll go over later in the video. It's got the core keyword with the previous balance update, so that's quite important. We'll go through that as well later in the video. It's a monster unit, so it's not a vehicle. Some people kind of get that one mixed up. It's not a vehicle, it's a monster. Then finally, of course, it's got the Dynasty keyword. It goes into any of your dynasties that you select from. Ability wise, it's got 2 that are the basic ones, Living Metal to regain a lost wound, and the command protocols if it's within 6 inches of a character model. Now bear in mind this isn't a character model, I kind of wish it was. It would protect it somewhat, but it's not a character, so if you want to use the command protocols with your Canoptek Reanimator, it will need to be within 6 inches of a character model, and you need to have a noble on the tabletop in order to use command protocols. It's got the explode ability, although it isn't a vehicle as mentioned, so it does still explode. On a roll of a 6 when it's destroyed, all units within 3 inches will suffer 1 mortal wound, and that includes your own unit, so just be aware of that. Try not to keep them too close, especially when this thing's nearly gone. And the final ability is an aura ability, which is a Nanoscarab reanimation beam. Now this is the reason you take this model, and it does the following. So within your command phase, you select a dynasty unit within 6 inches of the Canoptek Reanimator, and then while that unit is within 6 inches, whenever they're using the reanimation protocols, they can +1 to the reanimation protocols roll. So it's effectively like an eternity orb in a sense, except it's an aura. You've got to always stay within 6 inches. So if your warriors, for example, go moving off or go charging off, even though they've been selected from the command phase, they're then not going to be within that aura. Further to that, you can only select 1 unit to do this, so it kind of isn't an aura, even though it is an aura. It's only 1 unit and it's got to be within 6 inches, so there's a little bit of restriction there. Now there is a stratagem that opens it up a little bit. We'll go over that in a bit. Now just before breaking off into the rest of the video, I've done this in previous videos, I've already talked about this before, but if you're new to the channel, you won't have heard me say this. But when you're rolling for the reanimation protocols, when you've got this beam on your unit, so again, I'll use the example of warriors. If they're within 6 inches of the reanimator, instead of having a 5+ reanimation roll, they'll have a 4+ reanimation roll. What you've got to bear in mind is they already had a 5+ roll. So it's only an exact roll of a 4 that makes any difference, because a 5 and a 6, they were already coming back. Now with warriors it's slightly different because they get to reroll 1s with their ability, but it's an exact 4 that makes the difference. So why I'm mentioning this is because you're paying 80 points for this reanimator. So if you're counting up all your exact 4s throughout the game, if the amount of models that you've saved isn't more than 80 points, then you pretty much made a loss here. You brought the wrong unit, he's not done his job effectively enough. So in larger games it's probably going to be okay, but the smaller games I wouldn't bother. It might look really good when you're having a 4+ roll, but when you've already got a 5+ roll, you've got to remember it's exact 4s that make the difference. As for the weaponry, it's got 2 atomizer beams and the reanimator claws. So the atomizer beams, a 12-inch range, assault 3, strength 6, -2 AP and 1 damage. Now bear in mind you've got 2 of these. A lot of people seem to forget that. They do have 2 of them, so that's going to be 6 shots in total at strength 6. Now at 12-inch range, that's actually pretty decent, don't get me wrong. Even the toughness 5 models, you're going to be wounding them on a 3+, but it is only 12-inch range. You're going to be putting it quite close up and personal, especially if you're going against a melee faction. It's quite dangerous to be doing so, so that makes this weapon not as good as you'd think. Then as for the reanimator claws, it's strength user, so it's only strength 5. Again, it's -2 AP and 1 damage. You don't want to get this guy in melee. Yes, he does have 4 attacks at strength 5, but it isn't his strong suit, although he can fire into combat because he's a monster model. Now bear in mind with the new balance update, if you're going against Space Marines, if you're going against Sisters of Battle, Grey Knights or Chaos Space Marines, there will be a -1 AP to all the weapons now, which kind of sucks for us, doesn't it? So the AP on both of these weapons will now only be -1 against those 4 factions and all the sub-factions in between as well. So that being said, let's move on to its role within the game. So there's obviously one main role, and we've kind of just spoke about it. It's that beam going onto your units. It doesn't have to be warriors, it could be immortals, it could be heavy locust destroyers, a lich guard. Any unit that's within a dynasty code can use this beam to add 1 to their reanimation protocols role. Now he does have a secondary role. The fact that he's got the monster keyword means that he'll be applying a lookout sir ability to a character model, because you need at least 3 models within 3 inches of a character to provide the lookout sir bubble, or it could be a monster or a vehicle model. So as this has got the monster keyword, he can effectively give the lookout sir ability to any of your characters that are close by. But other than that, as mentioned, you're pretty much bringing him for that beam. So that's the datasheet all covered. Now we're going to move on to the stratagems available to the Canoptek Reanimator. So there's 3 I want to highlight here. The first one being Enslaved Protectors. He can simply heroically intervene as if he was a character. Now will you want to be doing that? Probably not. The second one is Prismatic Dimensional Breach for 1 command point. And if you've got a Monolith or a Night Scythe within your list, you can effectively pop this thing out because it's got the core keyword. So whether you're popping out a load of warriors or a load of Lich Guard models. But bear in mind you've got to select the unit for your reanimation beam within the command phase as opposed to the movement phase. So you're going to miss out on that opportunity there. However, there is a way of changing this, which is in your opponent's shooting phase using a stratagem called Reanimation Prioritization, but it's 2 command points, so it is quite pricey, and you can effectively change the unit that you're using the beam on. So if you've got a unit of warriors to your left and a unit of warriors to the right, and you've currently got the beam on the warriors to the left, maybe your opponent's going to start targeting the warriors to the right, so all of a sudden you can change where that beam is going, so you can put it on the other unit to the right, and they're going to have a +1 to their reanimation protocols, and you can do this in your opponent's shooting phase. So therefore you can actually sync it with a previous stratagem mentioned with a Night Scythe, because if they start targeting the unit that's just popped out of the Night Scythe with your Canoptek Reanimator, you can then use the beam in that shooting phase. But as mentioned, 2 command points, quite pricey. If I was the opponent and you've got 2 units, I'd probably purposely keep changing units just to make us spend the 2 CP and drain our command points there. Now finally, you can use the Disruption Field Stratagem for a command point to up his strength to strength 6. You probably don't want to do this if I'm honest, I'm just mentioning it because it's got the core keyword. So that's the stratagems that are available to the Canoptek Reanimator. Let's move on to the Dynasty Codes. So I wanted to mention 3 of the Dynasty Codes today from the 6 generic ones within the Codex. The first one being the Mefrit Dynasty. The fact that he's only got 12-inch range weapons with those 6 shots, you can up this to 15 inches by having the Mefrit Dynasty, and anything within half range you'll get an extra bit of AP as well on top of that, but it just gives him a little bit of extra range when using those range attacks. The next one worth a mention is the Sautek Dynasty. We don't talk about them that often because they're not performing that well and there's better options within the custom codes. However, their rapid fire range is at 15 inches as opposed to 12-inch range with their Gorse Flayers. So if you are playing with warriors and you want to be a little bit further back, this will help. Now this isn't direct synergy with the Canoptek Reanimator, but of course it's going to be wanting to use that beam on those warriors. Final one worth noting is the Nihilak Dynasty, of course, with objectives secured. Then furthermore, any -1 AP weapons that are firing at your Canoptek Reanimator while it's in its own deployment zone will go to 0 AP. But with objectives secured and 6 wounds, it does mean it's going to be able to hold an objective quite nicely, although it probably will get targeted quite early in the game, I'd imagine. I'm going to throw in the Zarakan Dynasty here for Chris Briozilio, you know who you are. He likes to do long comments about the Zarakan Dynasty. They're not a forgotten dynasty, believe me. Chris, by the sounds of it, is quite an experienced player with the Zarakan Dynasty, so I wanted to give him a little shout out. Now as for dynastic traditions, you've got Eternal Conquerors, of course, objective secured. You can also use Unyielding for that 6+ invuln save, because it doesn't actually have an invulnerable save at all. So having a 6+ can help it somewhat, probably not too much, but you know. Pitiless Hunters is an option if you've got a lot of rapid fire weapons within your list. So you've got your Gorse Flayers with the Warriors, the Gorse Blasters with the Immortals. If you're going to be having a load of those with your Canoptek Reanimator helping them, it's going to aid those guys. And if they stay stationary, they get to fire twice as many shots, with the rapid fire rule of course, but they can do it at full range as opposed to half range. Then furthermore, you've got a Movable Phalanx, which is probably the most ideal one for the Canoptek Reanimator. All your Warriors and your Immortals and all the guys that you're trying to beam, if they stay stationary, they're going to get a +1 to their armor saves. So that of course is adding to survivability to your list, which is why the Canoptek Reanimator is there in the first place. Then from the Circumstances of the Awakening list, you've got the Ancient Stir for the extra bit of movement for your Canoptek unit, so you'll be moving at 9 inches. Healthy Paranoia if you want to add 3 inches to the range, quite like the Mephit Dynasty. Again, not too bad. Relentlessly Expansionist if you want to reposition 6 inches pre-game, which is probably one of the most popular ones out of all these custom Dynasty codes. Then the last one I wanted to mention is Isolationists. If you're firing your rapid fire weapons within half range, you get +1 to the strength characteristics of the weapon. So if you're firing within 12-inch range, with the Gauss Flayers for example, they're going to +1 to the strength, so they'll be strength 5 Flayers, with twice as many shots of course, because they're rapid fire weapons anyway. But that's not really direct synergy again with the Canoptek Reanimator, but he's there to aid, mainly your troops really. That's the codes all dealt with, let's move on to the deployment. So deployment wise, it's very important that this thing is out of line of sight. This thing is going to get targeted very early on because your opponent knows, get rid of that, it makes getting rid of the warriors much easier. Now this could be considered a distraction for your opponent, but if you hide it out of sight, it makes it much more difficult for your opponent to remove it. And with the Q2 balance update we've recently had, the indirect fire weapons have all been nerfed, so the weapons that didn't need line of sight, for example the Hive Guard from the Tyranid Codex, they don't need line of sight, but now they're going to get a -1 to their ballistic skill, and they're going to get a +1 to your armor save. So that makes them harder to hit, and also you're going to get a 2+ armor save before any AP is taken off. So that's going to help it somewhat, but you don't want this thing out in the open, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, it's going to get targeted, so make sure it's well hidden. So now that we spoke about the deployment, let's move on to the synergy. Starting off with units that are going to synergize with this thing. First of all, of course, 20 warrior units, that's an easy option there. Getting a +1 to the reanimation protocol, so it's a 4+ roll, and they're re-rolling 1s because their numbers is Legion ability. So that's going to bring back warriors. So doing the maths here for you, you need to bring back at least 6 warriors with an exact reanimation protocol's roll of a 4 in order to break even, because that will save you 78 points, and this thing costs 80 points, didn't it? Any less than that, it's not done its job. Any more than that, then yeah, not too bad. However, I'd still argue that I'd rather have extra warriors. Let's say you've only got a unit of 10 warriors and you opted to take a Canoptek Reanimator. You may as well have just taken 6 more warriors, put the points into the warrior unit and have 16. I know 20 is the optimal number, but let's just say for this example you take 16. That's going to be 6 more models that are using their Gauss Flayers or Gauss Reapers. Also, it's going to aid their reanimation protocols, because as soon as the unit's destroyed, you can't enact the reanimation protocols anyway. So the more models in the unit, the more likely you're going to be bringing them back. Then furthermore, the footprint is also larger as well, for denying enemy deep strikes and things like that, and holding objectives too. So the only time I'd really bring a Canoptek Reanimator is if I've already got a 20-man blob, maybe even 2 20-man blobs, I've already maxed out on my warrior unit. If I'm bringing less than 20, yeah, definitely don't be bringing the Canoptek Reanimator. You may as well bring all the warriors that you can. Then speaking of warriors, there's some indirect synergy, whether you've got a Ghost Ark with a Repair Barge, whether you've got the Technomancer bringing them back D3 models each time, or characters that are holding the Resurrection Orbs, they can be bringing warriors back, so it all helps in terms of bringing models back. That's the whole point of the Reanimator, to aid with your reanimation protocols. The more models that are there, the easier it is to reenact it. Now because this thing hasn't got an invulnerable save, the best way of giving it one is from a Chronomancer. It's probably a little bit of a waste using the Chronometron ability on a Canoptek Reanimator, but that is the way of giving it an invuln save, a 5+ invuln save. It does also get to reroll the charge roll, but don't worry about that too much. You're giving it a 5+ invuln save, that's the way to do it. Now we've already mentioned the Technomancer with the warriors, but the Technomancer can also heal this Canoptek Reanimator as well, D3 lost wounds, because of the Canoptek Cloak war gear that it can also take. So it can be healing this thing back, D3 wounds. Now it's only got 6 to start with, so I think once it does get targeted it will probably be removed off the tabletop anyway, but if you've got a Technomancer nearby you can heal it up a little bit, and then don't forget to add living metal on top of that. And while we're talking about healing, you cannot use a Canoptek Spider to heal it, because again it's a monster, not a vehicle, so the Fabrication Claw Array is not going to work. Then the final bit of synergy is Illumina Zarez with his augmentation ability. Because the Reanimator has the core keyword, you can mechanically augment this thing. Now the one you really want is the toughness really. The ballistic skill, yeah, it's okay. The strength, you don't really need it. But having an extra bit of toughness to toughness 6 could give it a little bit of survivability, force your opponent to use the heavier weapons to try and remove it. Continuing on with the synergy, looking at some of the relics. Now there's one relic that does work and one relic that doesn't work. Now the one that does work is the Veil of Darkness relic. Now you might be thinking, Veil of Darkness relic? It does have the core keyword. So you could, for example, have a unit of flayed ones come in, 20 of them in fact, then take a character that's carrying the Veil of Darkness relic, and also take your Canoptek Reanimator, zip those two across the board to meet your flayed ones there. Maybe you're using an Overlord and now all of a sudden you've got the My Will Be Done ability on your flayed ones, and of course you can also use that beam on the flayed ones as well, and maybe the Overlord's also holding a Resurrection Orb too. So that is something to think about. Is that the best way of using it? Maybe not, but the option is there. Now the relic that isn't going to work with this thing is using the Eternity Orb with one of your character models, because you can only +1 to the Reanimation Protocols roll, you can't add 2. So adding 1 with the Reanimator beam and then adding 1 with the Eternity Orb, they're not going to go together, they're not going to stack, so you can't be doing that. Then the final part within this synergy section is the command protocols. I wanted to mention 2 command protocols here that are going to work slightly with a Canoptek Reanimator. The first one being Protocol of Eternal Guardian, and you're using Directive 1. And if you simply don't move this thing, you get the benefits of light cover, so a +1 to your armor save. Yeah, could be worse. And then the second one, Protocol of Conquering Tyrant. Using Directive 1 again, you're going to be adding 3 inches to all aura abilities. Now this one actually is quite favoured for this thing, because the aura is only 6 inches and the unit that you've got the ability on has to stay within 6 inches while they're using the Reanimation Protocols rolls. So that's not just the shooting phase, that could be the charge phase as well. So if they've charged out of the aura's range, they're not going to have that ability placed on them. But with this, that range increases to 9 inches. So that's all the synergy that I've come up with today. Let me know in the comments below if you've got any other synergies that haven't been mentioned within this video. But now we're going to be moving on to the secondary objectives and how to use the Canoptek Reanimator to score some points. So there's only really the Battlefield Supremacy list that you're going to be able to select from, simply because it's not an infantry unit and there's only one model within the unit. So there's only really 3 to use here from the Battlefield Supremacy list. The first one is Behind Enemy Lines. Again, you could use it with a Veil of Darkness relic or a Night Scythe, or potentially just moving up the board, I guess. It does have 8 inches after all. But I doubt it's going to make it, if I'm honest. If you're going to be moving it up the board, it's going to get shot off the table. There's better ways of doing this. Second one is Stranglehold, especially if you've got the Nihilak Dynasty or Eternal Conquerors. It's going to have objectives secured. It's going to assist in holding at least 3 objectives and more than what your opponent's holding. Then the third one is Engage on All Fronts. Now the reason I'm highlighting this one, you usually need 3 models within the unit to score Engage on All Fronts, or it could be a monster or vehicle model. And of course this has got the monster keyword, so this can be used on its own to score Engage on All Fronts. However, it's likely going to be staying within your own deployment zone, maybe moving to the mid-ground. Those kind of quarters should already kind of be getting scored anyway by your other units within your list, but he does contribute if you need him to. Okay, so now we're on to the Discord part of the video. So we go into our Discord, we take some comments relating to the unit we're doing today, which is the Canoptek Reanimator, of course. So the first one here is from Error401. So he's put 4 out of 10, really cool model with a decent buff, pity about how the aura works, needing line of sight. That's something I didn't actually mention earlier on, it's a good spot there. Unfortunately, its offensive and defensive profile is just not worth the points, and it's an elite slot. So that's what Error401 has put, he's giving it a 4 out of 10. Then we've got Datasheet. Fragility holds the Reanimator back heavily. There is a value on reanimating on 4s, but 30 points more on a few different HQs that have a Resurrection Orb. Then upgrade to the Orb of Eternity. You'll likely see a bigger return on reanimating there. 5 out of 10. So that's what some of the guys in the Discord have said. Shout out to both of them. If you want to get involved in this, you just got to simply join the Discord, and there'll be a channel within the Discord server. Every week I'll be putting up a new unit, and you put a little snippet of what you think, give it a score out of 10, and it might make the video. So that's what they think. Let's move on to my final thoughts. So at the start of the edition, they kind of stank. I'm not going to lie, they were my worst unit within the codex in my opinion, alongside some of the super heavies, but it was a pretty bad unit and it was quite pricey. It then got a reduction in price with the first balance update, putting it down to 80 points, which gave it a little bit more flexibility in terms of squeezing it into a list. Now for me, the ability is the problem here. Not only do you only get to select one unit with the ability, but it's also classed as an aura ability, even though it doesn't feel like it's an aura ability. It's not all units within 6 inches, it is only one, and they've got to stay within 6 inches, so if they go moving off, or they go charging off, and they're out of range with that 6-inch bubble, all of a sudden they've lost the ability. It kind of sucks for me, I don't quite like that. That needs a rework. Now the beam itself is okay when you've got a warrior heavy list, especially with the way the meta's gone now, because we're kind of forced into either playing heavy destroyer lists where we're going slicing and dicing, or we're playing for points, so we're sitting back holding objectives, warriors, immortals, so this is where the Canoptek Reanimator does help. Now the stratagem is workable, it's just too expensive for me. In fact the ability itself should just naturally be able to do this to all units within 6 inches. Will that be overpowered? I don't think it will when you look at the rest of the codexes within the current game. The meta has just completely risen with the codex creep, so I don't think it's that big of an ask to have it as just a complete aura as opposed to one unit, rather than having to pay 2 command points to be able to change the unit you're selecting from. 1 command point I would have been okay with, but having to pay 2, your opponent just simply has to change focus on a different target, and then you've got to make a decision. Am I going to spend 2 command points on giving them the reanimation beam or not? And then once you've done it, then your opponent could just swap back anyway, so it's kind of an absolute waste if you ask me. I don't like it. But going back to that beam, I urge everyone that's using the Canoptek Reanimator to count the exact amount of 4s you roll when using that beam ability on a unit. It doesn't have to be one unit, just whatever the Canoptek Reanimator does within the entire game. Count the exact rolls of a 4, not a 5, not a 6, they've already got that naturally. The exact 4s, I want you to count them up, then count how many points you've saved within the game. Does it go over 80 or not? If it doesn't, get rid of the Reanimator, put it back on the shelf, let it gather some dust, you don't need it. If it does get more than 80 points, how much more than 80 points is it actually getting? Is it just 10 or 20? Reconsider it, because you probably could have done better taking more units, more warriors, more immortals, than actually having this thing not do much in the back lines. Now with all that being said, we've got to be fair here. There was a recent tournament, I can't remember if it was last year, somebody mentioned it on the Discord, I can't actually find it at the moment, but one of the lists within the tournament, I think he placed pretty well, he might have even won it, I'm not entirely sure, but they had a Canoptek Reanimator within the list. You'll have to let me know in the comments below what the list looked like, because I can't seem to find it at the moment. So I've got to mention that just out of fairness. I think it was Joe from the Discord that mentioned it to me, but I can't find it anywhere, so let me know below what list it was in. So we're on to my stamp of approval now. Now if you asked me a year ago what stamp would I have given this, I would have given it the narrative stamp, but I'm not going to be doing that today. I'm going to push it up to the average stamp. I think it's slightly more usable, it's not as expensive as it used to be, and remember that line of sight buff for the indirect fire weapons, so that slightly helped it against Hive Guard again. Things that don't need line of sight, so it's slightly been helped in that sense, so it can hide behind terrain, but for today it's going to get the average stamp. So guys, that's it from me today. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.